4 days before America turned 250 years old, I got a letter from my homeowners association. It told me to take down the flag my husband was buried under. By the time I'm done telling you this, that HOA board will be gone. The management company that backed them will lose their contract, and the flag, the one my husband Frank carried through 2 deployments before he never came home from the third, will still be flying exactly where it's always flown. But I want you to understand something first. This didn't start with a flag. It started 3 years earlier with a Padres pennant and a woman named Roberta Sinclair who saw something in our little townhome community that had nothing to do with baseball and nothing to do with patriotism. She saw money. This is how she almost got it. My name is Eleanor Hargrove. I'm 68 years old, and for 22 years before I retired, I worked as a senior paralegal for a law firm in San Diego that did exactly one kind of work: homeowners association disputes. Not the glamorous kind, not the kind anybody writes movies about. I spent 2 decades reading governing documents so dense most attorneys skimmed them, cross-referencing state civil code sections against association bylaws, and building the kind of case files that made opposing counsel groan when they saw my name on the cover page. I knew HOA law the way a mechanic knows an engine by sound alone. My husband, Frank, had been a Marine, 2 tours, and on the 3rd deployment, a helicopter went down outside a base in Kandahar, and I became a 34-year-old widow with a folded flag in a glass case and a son who was 4 years old and didn't understand why his father wasn't coming home for his birthday. That flag case sat on my mantle for 15 years, and every morning since the day we closed on our townhome in Rosewood Court, a quiet development of 112 units tucked into the hills of San Marcos, I'd raised a second flag on a bracket mounted by our front door frame. Not the folded one, a new one that flew. It wasn't decoration to me. It was a conversation I had with Frank every single morning for 2 decades. Coffee, the driveway, the flag going up. My neighbor 3 doors down, Diane Kowalski, did the same thing. Hers for her father who'd served in Vietnam and told her before he passed that as long as she had a flagpole, he'd never really be gone. Neither of us thought of it as a statement. It was just Tuesday. It was just how the morning started. We had no idea a woman we hadn't even met yet was about to spend 3 years trying to take it away from us, and that she had a reason that had nothing to do with flags at all. I first met Roberta Sinclair at a board meeting in the Rosewood Court clubhouse back when she was campaigning for a board seat. She drove a leased white Mercedes she parked crooked across 2 visitor spots. She wore a real estate lapel pin to a homeowners meeting, which struck me as odd. Since she didn't own a brokerage, she just held a license quietly, the kind you keep active just in case. She shook my hand, glanced past me toward the row of townhomes on Nob Hill Road, and said something I didn't think much of at the time. "These units really don't reflect what they're worth," she said, looking at the mismatched flags, wind chimes, and potted plants lining the walkways. "Somebody should really clean this place up. Uniform curb appeal, that's where the value is." I smiled politely and said nothing. I'd heard some version of that sentence from a dozen HOA presidents over 22 years of case files. Most of them were harmless enthusiasts. I filed it away without a second thought. I wouldn't find out for another 2 years just how literally she meant value. For a while, life at Rosewood Court went on exactly the way it always had. My grandson visited on weekends and helped me water the row of geraniums under the flag bracket. Diane hosted a Friday night dinner once a month where 4 or 5 of us brought a dish and sat on her back patio until the sun went down over the hills. Greg down the row, a younger guy, easygoing, big into baseball, put up a Padres pennant flag the week his team made a playoff run. None of us thought twice about it. It was that kind of neighborhood. Somebody's daughter had a graduation banner up for a month. Somebody else flew a Mexican flag next to an American one every September for Independence Day, and nobody said a word. It was, by every measure, an unremarkable, pleasant little community, the kind you'd retire into and never leave. Which is exactly why none of us saw what was coming. The first fine notice went to Greg over that Padres pennant, $100, and an order to remove it within 10 days. Greg was annoyed, but he took it down. Not a hill worth dying on, he told me over the fence. What none of us understood yet was that Roberta didn't stop there. Within a month, a new flag policy appeared in the HOA's governing documents, not just banning sports pennants, but banning all residential flag displays, every single one, no exceptions written in. The memo, when it circulated, included a line from the HOA's attorney that I read 3 times before I fully absorbed it. Once the members allow use of common property by an owner to express what is essentially a political or affiliative view in a flag, sign, or banner, other owners will want to do the same, and the common area will degrade. I sat with that sentence a long time. 22 years of paralegal instinct told me something was wrong with it, not the grammar, the framing. Someone had built a blanket rule broad enough to catch everything, specifically so that no one could point at the real target and say, that's discriminatory. 2 years passed before the letters started arriving at my own door and at Diane's. Same wording, same 10-day deadline, same $100 fine. The letters didn't mention the Padres flag, or the graduation banner, or the September flags that had quietly reappeared and just as quietly gone unenforced. They mentioned one thing: the American flag on my doorframe and the American flag on Diane's. And this time, it wasn't springtime, and it wasn't just any Tuesday. It was 4 days before the 4th of July, the 250th 4th of July this country would ever see. My hip replacement surgery, the one I'd been putting off for 2 years, the one my doctor said couldn't wait much longer, was scheduled for the following month. I'd just applied for a home equity line to cover the portion my insurance wouldn't touch. $100 fine was nothing, but a fine that could become a lien on a title I needed clean for a loan approval, that was something else entirely. For the first time in 22 years of reading other people's HOA nightmares from the outside, I was living one from the inside. I didn't call Roberta. I didn't post in the neighborhood group chat. I didn't raise my voice to anyone. I did what 22 years of training had taught me to do. I opened a folder. Inside it went a printed copy of the federal Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, which explicitly prohibits any residential association from adopting a policy that restricts a homeowner's right to display the flag of the United States. Next to it went the relevant section of California's Civil Code, which does the same thing at the state level and specifically protects flag displays in what the law calls exclusive common areas, the parts of a shared property, like a door frame, that are designated for one homeowner's exclusive use. I pulled Rosewood Court's own governing documents and confirmed what I already suspected. The door frames, where both my flag and Diane's hung, were explicitly listed as exclusive common area in the association's own paperwork. Roberta's HOA had written a rule that violated federal law, state law, and its own governing documents, all in the same 3 sentences. I wrote a 2-page response letter citing all 3 sources by section number and sent it certified mail. Diane, following my lead, sent something nearly identical the same week. Neither of us took our flag down. I kept a copy of every letter, every certified mail receipt, and the date each one was sent. I'd built exactly this kind of file for other people for 2 decades. I was good at it. I just never imagined I'd need it for myself. Roberta's response arrived 2 weeks later, and it wasn't from Roberta at all. It came from the HOA's property management company, Meridian Community Management, and it was signed by a man named Nathan Voss, the compliance coordinator. Diane recognized the last name before I did. "Isn't that Roberta's cousin?" she asked at our next Friday dinner. It was. Nathan had joined Meridian 8 months earlier, not long after Roberta was elected board president, and not long after Meridian's management contract with Rosewood Court had quietly come up for renewal at a higher rate, approved by a board vote where Roberta hadn't recused herself. Nathan's letter was colder than the first. It stated that the association's legal counsel had reviewed the matter and determined the flags were not exempt under any applicable statute, and that continued noncompliance would result in a fine converting to a formal lien against the property after 30 days. Attached was a 1-paragraph opinion letter on legal letterhead, unsigned from a name I didn't recognize, and when I looked up the California State Bar Attorney Registry that evening, I found no record of that name being licensed to practice law in the state at all. I read the letter twice, then I opened my folder, dated it, and added it to the file. For the first time since this began, I felt something shift from irritation into something closer to certainty. This wasn't a well-meaning board making a mistake about flag etiquette. Somebody had built a legal-looking wall out of a fake opinion letter and a cousin's signature, and I had spent 22 years learning exactly how walls like that get built and exactly how they come down. Because 4 days before America's 250th birthday, both hearings were scheduled, mine and Diane's. Roberta thought she was calling 2 grandmothers into a small conference room to make them cry and sign a compliance agreement. She had no idea one of them had spent her whole career on the other side of that table. The lien hit my title on a Tuesday morning. I found out from my loan officer, not from the HOA. I was standing in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, watching steam rise off a coffee mug I'd poured and forgotten about, when his voice went careful in that specific way people's voices go when they're about to ruin your week. "There's a lien recorded against the property, Mrs. Hargrove. We can't move forward with the home equity line until it's resolved." My hip surgery was in 11 days. The surgery I'd delayed twice already because of insurance gaps. The surgery my surgeon had said, in a tone that didn't leave room for a third delay, needed to happen now. I set the coffee down. My hand, I noticed, wasn't quite steady. A $100 fine over a flag my husband would have recognized instantly. Full-sized cotton poly blend, exactly the kind the Department of Defense hands a widow at a funeral, had somehow become a four-figure lien standing between me and a surgery I needed to walk without pain for the first time in 2 years. I thought about taking the flag down, just for a while, just until the surgery cleared. I stood in my doorway that evening, hand on the bracket, and looked at it a long moment. Then I thought about Frank, about the folded flag in the glass case on my mantel, and the one that flew every morning that wasn't folded at all, the one that meant he was still, in some small daily way, coming home. I took my hand off the bracket. The flag stayed up. What happened next is the part I still find hardest to talk about. Harder, honestly, than the lien itself. Someone in the Rosewood Court group chat, I never found out who, though I have a guess, posted that certain residents were picking fights with the board over a flag policy and putting the whole community's legal exposure at risk over their own stubbornness. No names. It didn't need names. Everyone in 112-unit community knew exactly whose doorframes had flags on them. Within a week, two neighbors who used to wave from their driveways started taking a different route to their cars. Diane's Friday dinner, the one that had run for years without fail, quietly stopped getting responses. One woman I'd known for a decade sent a text that read essentially, "I support you, but I can't afford to be involved in this." My loan application was formally denied 9 days before my surgery date. The lien, still active, made the property look encumbered enough that the lender wouldn't move. I called 3 other lenders. All 3 said some version of the same thing: come back once the lien clears. For 3 days, I, the woman who'd spent 22 years telling other frightened homeowners exactly which statute protected them, sat at my kitchen table and genuinely didn't know if I'd be able to pay for my own surgery on time. It is one thing to know the law. It is another thing entirely to watch it get twisted against you by people who are counting on you being too tired, too isolated, or too scared to fight back. For 3 days, I was all 3. Then Diane knocked on my door with a casserole dish and said 4 words I still repeat to people who ask me how I got through it: not without a fight. I stopped waiting for Meridian to explain themselves and started requesting records instead. As an owner, I was legally entitled to board meeting minutes, financial disclosures, and vendor contracts, and I knew exactly which California Civil Code sections guaranteed that access because I'd cited them for clients 100 times. The first thing I noticed, reading 5 years of minutes at my kitchen table with Diane across from me sorting a second stack, was a gap. The flag policy had first appeared in the minutes as a passing line item, no vote recorded, no owner comment period noted, which the association's own bylaws required for any rule affecting exclusive common area. "That's not how you pass a rule," I said. "That's how you bury one." The second thing, a few days later, over coffee with a board member named Judith, who'd quietly grown uneasy with Roberta's leadership, Meridian's management contract, the one renewed the year Roberta took the presidency, included a clause tying part of Nathan's compensation to lien recovery volume. The more liens Meridian collected on, the more Nathan made. The third thing took me longest to find, buried in county property records I pulled from the assessor's office myself. A townhome 2 streets over, foreclosed the year before after its owner, an elderly widower, fell behind on HOA dues stacked from repeated architectural fines, had been purchased at auction for well under market value. The buyer's name on the deed? A limited liability company, registered 11 months earlier at an address that traced back to Roberta Sinclair's real estate license file. I sat back in my chair. Diane looked across the table. "It was never about the flags," I said quietly. "The flags were just the easiest fight to pick. Uniform curb appeal, stricter rules, more fines, more liens, more forced sales, cheaper units for her to flip. She needs the neighborhood to look a certain way to sell it. We were just in the way. It had taken 3 years, but the folder on my kitchen table was no longer 2 pages of certified mail receipts. It was 41. Roberta made her first real mistake 2 weeks before the hearing, and she made it in writing. Judith, the board member who'd started asking her own questions, forwarded me an email chain she'd been accidentally copied on. In it, Roberta instructed Nathan to move faster on the 2 remaining flag files before the anniversary coverage starts, and to make sure the attorney letter goes out again, worded the same as last time. The same fabricated opinion letter, twice, in writing, with a timeline explicitly tied to the approaching 4th of July, not because of any legal deadline, but because she wanted the fines locked in before local reporters started calling around about flag stories, the way they always do the week of the anniversary. I added the email to the folder. 42 pages now. She had spent 3 years being careful. In the final stretch, trying to beat a newspaper deadline that hadn't even been assigned yet, she stopped being careful at all. The hearing room at the Rosewood Court Clubhouse was standing room only. Word travels fast in a 112-unit community, and by the night of my hearing, most of it had traveled. Roberta sat at the head table between Nathan and a Meridian attorney who, notably, was not the name on the earlier legal opinion letter. I placed a single folder on the table and began. Slide 1, a side-by-side of 2 enforcement letters, Greg's Padres flag from 3 years earlier and my own notice, with the dates highlighted. The association's own bylaws capped enforcement action at 5 years from a violation's start. My flag had flown undisturbed for over 20. Roberta's jaw tightened. She said nothing. Slide 2. The county assessor's photo of the townhome bought at auction next to a listing photo from a real estate site, same unit, relisted 4 months later at nearly double the purchase price. Agent of record, Roberta Sinclair. A murmur went through the room. Nathan looked at his hands. Slide 3. The management contract clause tying compliance bonuses to lien volume next to county recorder documents showing 6 liens filed against Rosewood Court owners in the 18 months since. The Meridian attorney leaned over and whispered something to Roberta. She didn't respond. Slide 4, the last one. I pressed play on a voice recording Judith had made, entirely within her legal rights as a board member documenting a board matter, of Roberta on a phone call 2 days earlier. Her own voice filled the room. Once the 2 of them are gone, the rest fall in line. It's not about the flag. It's never been about the flag. Nobody in that room said a word for almost 10 full seconds. I closed my folder. I'm not taking my flag down. I never was. What happened over the following 2 months happened fast once it started. The Homeowners Association's insurance carrier, informed of the fabricated attorney letter, opened its own inquiry and flagged the matter to the California Bureau of Real Estate. Roberta's license went under formal review. Rosewood Court's ownership held a special recall vote. 91 of the community's 112 units voted. Roberta was removed from the board 84-7. Meridian Community Management's contract was terminated at the next regular meeting, and the incoming board, with Judith now serving as interim president, brought in independent counsel to review every fine issued in the past 3 years. Every flag-related fine was voided and refunded, including Greg's original $100 for the Padres pennant, with a formal written apology attached. The lien against my title was released within a week of the recall vote. My surgery, delayed by nearly a month past its original date, finally happened. I walked out of physical therapy 8 weeks later without the cane I'd needed going in. The flag policy itself was rewritten from scratch, this time with actual legal review, and now explicitly protects the American flag, consistent with both the Federal Freedom to Display the American Flag Act and California's Civil Code, the exact 2 sources I'd cited in a 2-page letter nearly 3 years earlier, back when nobody but Diane was listening. The auction-bought townhome is currently the subject of a separate civil claim by the county, examining whether the original foreclosure was improperly accelerated by fines tied to the same flag policy. Nathan Voss no longer works in property management. Every morning, I still walk out to my front door frame with a cup of coffee and raise the flag. The geraniums are still there. So is the bracket Frank installed himself 20 years ago, the summer we moved in. I found the receipt for it once tucked in an old toolbox, dated the same week we closed on the house. Diane's flag still goes up 3 doors down, same time most mornings, and some Fridays there's a casserole dish and a full table on the back patio again. Judith comes now, and so eventually did most of the neighbors who'd gone quiet during the worst of it. Nobody talks much about that stretch anymore. We don't need to. People ask me sometimes how a rule like that survives for 3 years in a 112-unit community before anyone stops it. I tell them, it doesn't survive because people don't know the law. It survives because most people assume nobody will actually read it that closely, that the folder and the citations and the 5-year deadline, that's too much trouble for anyone to bother with over a flag. They're usually right. That's what makes it work most places. They just happened to pick the one house on the block where a flag wasn't decoration. It was a promise, and the woman keeping it used to build these exact case files for a living. The flag Frank came home under is still in the glass case on my mantel. The one I raise every morning is a little sun-faded now, the stripes softened at the edges from 20 years of California wind. I have no plans to replace it early. So here's what I want to know. If it had been your doorframe, your father's flag, your husband's flag, 40 years of a family tradition, would you have taken it down? Or would you have started a folder? Tell me in the comments.